After days of being kept inside with it pouring down with rain and being absolutely freezing cold outside, had the heating on and everything, it's now back to being spring and back to being out in the garden as well. It's a lot more pleasant. And I've realized that I haven't shown you what's been happening in the home garden over the past few weeks. The last video I did was actually constructing the raised beds. So today I'm going to show you what's been happening. So we're going to look at the raised beds, we're going to look at what's going on in the greenhouse behind me, we're going to look at the patio, and we're going to look at some of these new plants that I found. The raised beds look a lot different from last time, don't they? And although I would love to have them completely open and veg overflowing and spilling over the sides, I have a few challenges here. So first of all, cats. My own and other cats from the neighborhood. I've been finding evidence of their digging around and leaving little deposits in the topsoil that I've put on the tops of the beds. Can't have that with edibles. I also have birds here, so there's lots of pigeons, there's seagulls, there's all kinds of birds, blackbirds as well that like digging around. And so this netting and the hoops that I've brought home from the allotment are to keep basically everything out of the garden beds. And because they're raised up a little bit, I don't have to worry as much with hedgehogs getting caught in the netting. But if you are in Britain or in Europe, or you have other animals that could get caught in netting, keep it really tight, because tight netting tends to not catch them as much as loose netting, especially if they're around on the floor or on the ground, nosing about. They get caught in loose netting a lot easier than if it's tight. Before we go and have a look at what's in the beds, let's have a look at the roses. Last November, I actually created a video on planting bare root roses. These are the David Austin roses. It's called Generous Gardener, this variety. And when I put it in the ground, it was basically just a few little sticks sticking up above the surface of the soil. And now look at it. So I'll be tying these in to the garden arch. This is a climbing variety. So I hope that it'll get some height on it this year and years to come, go up and over this arch. And then the roses are a type that are really fragrant, they repeat flower, and they should also produce some really nice rose hips in the autumn. Just next door is where I've planted my peas. And again this year I'm growing a dwarf variety. It's called Meteor. And I had it growing in a gutter, and then I put it out just a few days ago. These peas will only grow to about 1 meter tall, so they'll stay within this netting their entire lives. Last year, they actually started growing into the netting on the top, so I'm using a little bit higher hoops this year. I also had quite a bit of trouble actually getting the peas out of the gutter this year. So I think that next year what I'll do is I'll continue growing them in the gutter, but I will cut the gutter into 3, and that should make it a lot easier to get them out. Oh, we've got a show off up there. The space that has changed probably the most in the past month or so has been this back patio. So up until now, it's been a bit of a construction site. I built the L-shaped bed, as you recall in a previous video, but since then I have filled it in, I've planted it up with a few things, so some herbs, and we'll get to that in a second. There's also a patio set out here now. We've got a table, some pots, and it's really starting to come together. There's a lot that needs to be done back here though, because I've noticed that a lot of the sun is over on the far wall there. So I have some ideas for maybe some vertical kind of planters that I could maybe lean against the wall and make use of all that sunlight. There's also going to be a lot of painting and some work on the paving stones back here, but it is starting to come together. It's starting to be a space that we can really enjoy, and just in time for all of this great sunshine. So let's go have a look to see what else is growing and what's going on back here on the patio. Although I have plenty of herbs growing at the allotment garden, it's just so much more convenient to have them outside the kitchen door. So you'll notice that I have rosemary, 2 different types of thyme, and sage growing over on this side of the L-shaped patio planter. And then along this side, I've put in some spontaneously purchased French lavender. I've got 4 of them. And then also dwarf patio fruit trees. And these are the ones from Thompson and Morgan. And they're just starting to kind of break out into leaf right now. So these are supposed to only get about that tall, so only about 1 meter tall total. So we'll see how they do. And if you look closely in the back there, this is something I just noticed yesterday. The crocosmia is shooting up behind the landscaping fabric. Thank goodness I put it down. But irregardless, I'm going to have to dig those out and make sure that it doesn't grow up again. There are so many corms in the soil underneath. It was just impossible to fill this without putting some kind of landscaping fabric down. They can be really, really invasive. Lilacs always remind me of my grandmother. She had some growing in her garden, and I had no idea that this was a lilac until it started blossoming. There's a purple one here, and then a smaller white one that's over in the far hedge. And this isn't the only plant or flower that I've just recently discovered in the garden. Tucked behind an old woody shrub that I took out was this beautiful clematis. I have no idea what variety it is, so if you know, do leave it as a comment down below. At the moment, I have it just pinned to the fence with some string, but it's such a beautiful big plant that I thought that it deserved a bit more to climb on. And so that's the reason that I went to the garden center yesterday, just to pick up this trellis. So that is a job for the next week or so, installing that, and then training the clematis to grow up and over it and to create a lovely little feature over here. If you recall, I took down an old trellis next to this gate last year, and this was growing along one side of it, and I cut it all the way down, and I didn't give it a second's thought at the time. But now that it's starting to regrow and climb and trying to find someplace to go, I think it might be a type of honeysuckle. I asked a friend of mine who knows a little bit more about flowers, and she thinks so. And I do like honeysuckle, so I need to figure out something to do with this guy because it is getting tangled and looking for some place to grow. And right now there's no place for it to go, really. There's no vertical space for it. So it might be a little bit of a trellis built along here. I might have to move it. I don't know. If you have any suggestions, leave it as a comment down below. The heart of my garden is the greenhouse, and I've got quite a few things growing in here. So I've got things that I spontaneously purchased yesterday. Me going to the garden center, dangerous. I also have lots of trays of things that I have grown from seed. So my last video was actually showing how to make these newspaper pots. The nasturtiums have really settled in, they're doing all right. But I'm waiting for a lot of things to come up. It's funny how the greenhouse, it will fill up with seedlings and then empty, and then fill up with seedlings again and empty. But I think from this point onwards, it's going to be completely full because I've got some really good news. Recently, I thought that the tomatoes were finished. that the tomato plants had some kind of disease. I didn't really know. The leaves had turned black, especially around the edges, and I thought it was just going to be an absolute disaster, especially since I'm doing a tomato growing series this year on the YouTube channel. Well, I'm really pleased to announce that they have survived. I'm gonna lean down and grab one of them. So this is one of the Costa Luto Florentinos, and I took all the leaves off of the side, and they're starting to regrow, and the growth on the top is really healthy as well. So this means that I will be planting these out into the greenhouse border very soon. In fact, for next week's video, you'll see a lot more about that. So that's some really good news, but that also means that half of this greenhouse, this side, will be completely choca. And I also have some aubergines and peppers and other things that need to go into pots and grow in here as well, aside from all of the seedlings. The last time I showed you the inside of here, there was no staging. So I've got 2 different sets of staging in here. So these shelving units and lots of little plants. And many of them haven't yet come up, but I've got some sunflowers back here. This is a type called Velvet Queen. Some rockets that I purchased from, I hate calling it the garden center, but basically garden center and DIY shop that I had to go to get the trellis. Lots of different types of greens. So I've got cabbage in here and kohlrabi and all kinds. I've got hollyhock flowers in the back there nearest the window, and all of these need hardening off and planting outside. These here are cosmos, and there's chard and beetroot, some leeks. These are a type of calendula flower. I'm really excited about this because this is the medicinal variety that's used for herb farms, and I had to specially order the variety from Germany. It was very difficult to find. And then a little bit further down here, there are more sweet peas and also a tray that is pretty recently sown up with seeds. And you can see just a couple of the winter radishes coming up. This is a variety called China Rose, which is quite a large radish. On the smaller staging over here, I've got some dahlias that I grew from seed this year, and these are from the same seed packet as the dahlias that I grew for the allotment last year. These are a type of eggplant, aubergine, peppers, elephant garlic. This is interesting. A friend of mine grows elephant garlic and brought some with her to the seed swap this year, and they need to be in the cold, and they hadn't been, so she advised me to pop them in the refrigerator, which I did for a couple of months, and then I popped them into compost, and away they've grown. Begonias, which are not really my favorite, but they were gifted, so we'll have to grow them. And sweet corn. Now, I have not grown sweet corn since 2010 because it's difficult to grow them here. It's just so mild and not really warm enough for sweet corn. It's not that one, it's this one. Sweet corn Fisher's Earliest. I got this variety from Baker's Creek Seeds in the States, and they sent it to me. And they ripen earliest, so I'm hoping that it'll work for this climate. So we shall see. When I think back to what the garden looked like when we first moved in, so end of August last year, completely different to what it's looking like now. It's really starting to take on my stamp. So the raised beds, even doing the paint along the patio, really brightened things up. We're able to use the patio now, and there's a lot more things growing and about to be planted, especially in the beds here and the borders. Next week we'll be back looking at the tomatoes and planting them here in the greenhouse. So we'll touch up on that, and then the week after that we'll go back to the allotment garden to see what's been happening there, because while I've been working and doing a lot back here, there's a lot that's been happening in the allotment as well. And it's this time of the year that a lot is changing from day to day, and plants are really starting to put on a lot of foliage. So I will catch you again next week. Hope you enjoyed this update on the home garden, and I will see you soon for another video here on Lovely Greens. Bye for now.